Hey folks, Eric Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. Sorry for that little background audio here. I'm here with you. Welcome to another live stream on a beautiful Wednesday in June. Summer officially began yesterday, and here we are. It's going to be a long, hot summer in the Middle East. It already is, as we've been discussing here on the newscast in recent weeks, but we've got a lot to talk about today. We already have people from all over the world joining us. I see New Zealand here. Hello, New Zealand. I see someone from the Utah mountains, someone from Southern California, Mississippi, all over the US, but again, all over the world. New Zealand, we'll have Africa, Europe, Latin America, Asia, and beyond today on the live stream. That's why I love these live streams. I say it all the time. We have the watchmen and women literally from around the world with us. So it is really cool to have this opportunity, and a blessing, quite frankly, to have this opportunity. The big story, obviously, that we will dig into today, the changing of the guard politically in Israel, a political earthquake, I would call it, for the Jewish state, and not the first. In the past 3 years, we've had, this will be the fifth election in 3 years for Israel. So it's been really a series of political tremors and earthquakes, I guess you could say, over the past 3 years. Hey, you can't say that Israel is not a free and open democracy. All they do is have elections, it seems. Number 5 coming up, looking like this October. Now, there was a brief window here, and we'll unpack all of this today and why it's so important. Are there prophetic implications to the political instability in Israel? And why is it dangerous for Israel's security to have so much instability? But real quick, and I'm going to give everyone a shout out in a second. We have Spain, Canada right now, Trinidad, people writing in from. When I look off to the side, I'm just looking at our chat on my laptop, and we have a very active chat. We will have thousands of watchmen and women on the wall joining us today on the live stream, and we're going until 5 p.m. Eastern time with Q&A for the last 15 minutes. You want to be sure to stick around for that. But Bibi, the former and perhaps future Israeli prime minister, has a short window here, folks, to form a coalition government, a right-wing government. He probably won't be able to do it. He just won't have enough time, most likely. So it looks like Israel will indeed move on to elections in October. I want to break down what happened, where we are now, and where it goes from here in terms of the leadership of the land of Israel, of the state of Israel. What comes next? Wow, the timing for this, a changing of the guard. Should we be concerned about Yair Lapid, who would be center left, I would say, for sure, becoming Israel's interim prime minister, at least until October? Does Bibi have the inside track to become prime minister with elections in October? Is there a slight chance he can cobble together a coalition that would help Israel avoid another round of elections? Again, looks like it may be unlikely right now, but anything is possible. In today's Middle East, folks, if we have learned anything, it is to expect the unexpected. I always give the example of the so-called Arab Spring, which quickly devolved into an Islamist winter. But I give the example of Egypt, where you had 2 massive revolutions in the span of 2 years. Expect the unexpected in today's Middle East. Egypt, of course, the most populous Arab nation. Many say, as Egypt goes, so goes the Muslim and Arab world. 2 massive, again, revolutions between 2011 and 2013. First, obviously, the Hosni Mubarak regime was overthrown, and then the Muslim Brotherhood, thankfully, was overthrown. Now we have President Sisi, and he has had a very strong relationship with Israel. That's another topic, perhaps, for later in the newscast, but that is a prime example, what happened in Egypt, that we cannot take anything at face value these days in the Middle East, or really anywhere in the world, and just say, well, this is the way it's going to be. And everything's going to stay this way. And what I'm saying, folks, is now is a time, in these perilous times, in these Bible times in which we are living, to throw conventional thinking out the window. Expect the unconventional in Israel and the Middle East, and really throughout the world these days, for good and for bad. I want to unpack this today. I see Stockholm, Sweden joining us. Hello, Sweden. I see Nairobi, Kenya, Nigeria, DC, California, This is great. Welcome, watchmen and women on the wall, and welcome for such a time as this. Now, we're going to talk, obviously, about the political situation in Israel. We also want to talk about new threats of assassination against former Trump administration officials. I'm talking about former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in particular. A new Iranian threat against Pompeo's life. Kind of a big deal, I would say, yet we're still going to negotiate with the Iranian regime as they actively threaten current and former U.S. officials, but I digress. We'll talk about that as well. We want to talk too, and this has been a theme in our last several live streams. We want to talk about what can only be described as the unraveling of the relationship between Israel and Russia. Did you hear about this UN resolution that Russia is reportedly going to present to the UN Security Council? That's a big deal. We talked about it a bit on Monday's newscast as well. And when you talk about the Middle East and prophetic implications and Russia, you've got quite a mix there. I'm thinking Ezekiel 38 and 39 and the march towards that prophetic event happening. And we also want to just give you kind of a roundup of some other stories we've been following very closely here in the past few days, including what was really stunning to follow. We saw it in real time, the thankfully unraveling of these Iranian terror plots in Turkey against Israelis in that country. Now, this was really fascinating to watch, well, disturbing as well. And thankfully, again, no Israelis were harmed. But folks, this went on for about a week-long span where there were Iranian terror cells on the ground in Turkey, reportedly, actively hunting and seeking Israeli citizens who they could kidnap or murder on Turkish soil. Now, Turkey, you might say, Turkey, what on earth are Israelis doing in Turkey? Well, I know that things have been very tense, to say the least, between Israel and Turkey, thanks to the Turkish leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood-aligned radical Recep Erdogan, the current Turkish president. Things have been tense. He is viciously, I don't say that word lightly, viciously anti-Israel. Now, all of a sudden, he's on a charm offensive over the past few months because inflation in Turkey is through the roof and his economy is in tatters right now. And he would like a part of that Israeli natural gas, a possible pipeline that could go through Turkey. He'd love to see that. I don't think it's going to happen. But the charm offensive is in full swing, courtesy of Erdogan. But all that said, still, it's been tense. He's unpredictable. He threw an American pastor, Andrew Brunson, into prison a few years ago. So you might think that Israelis would stay away from Turkey, right? Well, even though Turkey and Israel had great relations throughout most of the 20th century, really until 2002 when Erdogan came to power, it's been a steady decline over the past 20 years. All that said, and nonetheless, many Israelis travel to Turkey every year. It's one of their top tourist destinations. Israel's a stone's throw from Turkey, right across the Mediterranean, of course. And a lot of Israelis have loved to go there and visit. Hey, Turkey, a beautiful country with obviously pretty amazing history and biblical history as well. If you're a Christian, look, Paul's letters, and Paul spent a lot of time in Turkey. So there's a lot to see there. But with Erdogan, that's obviously a deterrent to traveling to that country, you would think, especially for Israelis. But nonetheless, there were some 2,000 Israelis in Turkey as of a few days ago, and there was concern here. Again, you essentially have Iranian terror cells active in that country, or were active at least, and kind of roving around and looking for Israelis to target. Wow, what a situation. Again, Israeli and Turkish authorities reportedly work closely together to foil any potential plots, and now reportedly these Iranian cells have left Turkey. But a precarious moment for sure. We'll get into that a bit more as well. What are the implications there? So as you can tell, we've got a lot to discuss, and we're going to close out. I think you're going to like this. Before our Q&A, which lasts 4:45 roughly till 5 p.m. Eastern, 15 solid minutes of questions and answers, briefly, a new live stream segment exclusively for our live streams. It is called Watch and Pray. Watchman, watch, get it? I know, really clever. But watch and pray, and you're going to like this. I am going to lay out today, each week we'll do this, we'll lay out a Bible verse. A verse today that I believe has great prophetic implications, but is largely overlooked. I'll give you a teaser right now. I'm talking about the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 2. You may want to have your Bible or your Bible app handy as we walk through for our watch and pray segment and what I think it all means. And I think it's quite a big deal. And man, we talk a lot about the book of Revelation, of course, and Ezekiel, Isaiah 17, and so many prophecies. But Joel 3:2, especially because it's in regard to Israel, that's overlooked. And it's a prophecy of things to come. So I think it's very important. And it is a message to Israel's enemies that they won't like. So we'll break that down. Watch and pray. Okay. The Israeli political situation. And yes, wow, we have an active chat. We have thousands of people with us right now, just so you know. And we have a very active chat going on already, as we always do. So I love it. And be sure, hey, chatters, send your questions along. Don't forget. Okay. The Israeli political situation, quick breakdown. You might have just tuned in and said, what? Wait, new prime minister, what's going on? Here's what's going on. Over the past few weeks, this far-flung and very shaky Israeli coalition has been steadily unraveling. Now, remember, this coalition came to power in June 2021. I was there in Israel covering it at the Knesset. It was I call it the anyone but Bibi coalition. What does that mean? I believe there were 8 or 9 different political factions that formed this coalition. Imagine that. 8 or 9 different political parties with, most importantly here, folks, key point, differing ideologies and outlooks. You had right-wing parties, left-wing parties, kind of centrist parties, and even an Arab Islamist party, the Ram party, that was aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood, all forming one government. You might say, how? If Democrats and Republicans clearly can't get along in the United States, how on earth are 8 or 9 parties going to get together and get along in Israel? Well, it was a tough slog from the beginning, and it didn't last very long. Again, remember, all of these far-flung parties with differing ideologies were united around one thing: anyone but Bibi, ABB, I guess you could call it. They all wanted to prevent Benjamin Netanyahu from being prime minister. And hey, Bibi had an incredible run. And he went for overall 15 years, 12 years in succession from 1999. From 2009 to 2021. He also served, people forget, from 96 to 99. So they wanted to deny him. They had personal animosity towards him, who arguably Bibi Netanyahu, some would say the greatest prime minister in Israel's history. Others would say, no, he's the problem with Israel. No matter where I respect and admire Benjamin Netanyahu for his strength and his strong leadership for the state of Israel. I'll say that. And no matter where you fall, though, and many might disagree, no matter where you fall, what is clear is that, look, you had a lot of enemies. When you're on top, everyone wants to knock you down, it seems. And that's exactly what happened with this coalition. So over the past year, starting in June 20, almost to the day, from June 2021 until this Monday, when the government formally announced that it was disbanding, you had this coalition running Israel, and the prime minister was Naftali Bennett. Bennett, obviously on the right of the Israeli political spectrum. Yair Lapid, who was his main coalition partner, serves as the foreign minister. He would say, I would say left-leaning for sure. Some say he's a centrist. I would say he's leaning to the left, certainly on cultural issues. He's a former TV news anchor, by the way, in Israel. So the guy is very adept in front of a camera. He will now be Israel's interim prime minister. He and Bennett held a press conference on Monday announcing, look, we just can't hold this coalition together anymore. There were defections and people were leaving and pulling out. They were saying, we're going to blow this thing up. Is this really a great surprise, folks? I mean, from the moment they came to power last June, we were kind of saying, okay, we're kind of estimating and saying, how long is this going to last? when you have I believe eight or nine, I keep saying that, 8 or 9 different political parties with different ideologies together, it's a recipe eventually for disaster. And that's exactly what happened. Eventually, they started squabbling. People were saying, I'm pulling out. They couldn't agree. And now you have the situation where Bennett and Lapid hold this press conference on Monday. And Bennett says, I'm stepping aside as prime minister. And Yair Lapid, who I just mentioned, will now be the interim caretaker prime minister until October. Hey, that's got about 3-4 months where he will be the man in charge in Israel until elections in October. Now, as all this is happening, Bibi is waiting in the wings, and Bibi is saying, I told you so. This coalition, he said, from the beginning was doomed to fail. They were weak, and this is exactly what I expected. And now Bibi believes that he will once again be prime minister. I was in a meeting with Netanyahu in late April. It was an off-the-record meeting with a group of evangelical journalists, media members, and business leaders. I've talked about it here in the live stream and on the newscast. And my friend Joel Rosenberg wrote about it afterwards. Again, it was an off-the-record meeting. I can't share what was said, but Joel made a great point. He said Netanyahu is tanned, rested, and ready. I will just say, coming out of that meeting, and it was a small group of us meeting with Bibi at the Knesset. And remember, he's Israel's main opposition leader right now. I will just say that he projected confidence, and he absolutely is ready to lead Israel once again. He made that very clear. So he's going to go all in, and he's going to make a strong push to once again be Israel's prime minister in October. It looks like it's heading to an election once again. And the main motivation, I believe, for Netanyahu is Iran. I believe that he feels he has unfinished business when it comes to the Iran threat. That was the sense I got just in listening to him talk. Look, for 12 years in office, from 2009 to 2021, Iran was front and center on his agenda, right? And the Iran nuclear program, there were rumblings that back in 2012, around then, that he was strongly considering striking Iran's nuclear facilities then, when Barack Obama was president. Obviously, Obama and Bibi did not have a good relationship. Obama, in my view, was hostile to Bibi and to Israel. I would argue, and people say, don't get political. Well, I think it was pretty clear that he was the most, from an American perspective, sorry to offend you, but I'm going to tell it like it is. He was the most anti-Israel American president that I can remember. I guess Jimmy Carter would be a close second, who's written books accusing Israel of apartheid. But Obama and Bibi, needless to say, did not get along. And it was tough for Bibi during that time to have the freedom that he wanted, perhaps, to strike Iran. But now, once again, it's tough because you have Joe Biden, who obviously was Barack Obama's vice president, who's probably none too fond of Bibi in his own right. And he's president right now. And if Bibi becomes prime minister once again, it gets very interesting. It's already very interesting because the Middle East never sleeps, and whatever happens in Israel has profound implications for you, no matter where you live around the world. But, Bibi had that brief window, a few years there, well, not too brief, about 4 years, where for once he actually had an American president, an American counterpart who was friendly. Now, 1996 to 99, Bibi was prime minister. Bill Clinton was in office. 2009 to 2016, Barack Obama was in office. Bibi and Trump were quite a tandem there for 4 years. And now, if he becomes prime minister again, he is looking at dealing with a left-wing U.S. government once again. So I just think it'll be interesting. I don't know if that's the right word to use. That's an understatement, to see how that's all going to play out. But Bibi's ready for sure. He's got to be considered the favorite, you would think, to be Israel's prime minister in October. And I believe that if he assumes the position once again of Israeli prime minister, go ahead with Iran and the day of reckoning for the Iranian regime. And hey, that day's been coming anyway. I will say what you want. I know we have a lot of people in the chat who will bash the Bennett government. But I have to say, when it came to Iran and hitting Iran and Iran's proxies, I thought the Bennett government did some very good things. I liked this octopus doctrine that Bennett announced about 2 weeks ago, where he said, hey, enough of just hitting Iran's proxies like Hamas and Islamic Jihad and in Syria, which is obviously very important at Israel's doorstep. He said, no, that's just the tentacles, the arms of the octopus. The head of the octopus is in Iran. That's the head, the fount of all the terror across the region. So guess what? He said, we're not just going to hit the tentacles now. We're going to go straight to the head and hit them at the root of the terror inside Iran, on Iranian soil. And this is really, to me, a continuation of what Bibi did, mostly. I mean, you saw the takeout of Fakhrizadeh, the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program, back in November 2020, when Bibi was still prime minister, as well as sabotage and assassinations of Iranian scientists, sabotage against Iranian nuclear facilities, etc. under Bibi. It was a continuation under Bennett, but he gave it a nice name, the octopus doctrine. But to me, it was a continuation. And perhaps Bennett was saying, we're going to, and not perhaps, he declared this publicly, we're going to kind of up our game on Iranian soil, hitting them directly and deterring them. So that was a good thing. I think it's hard to argue that that was a good thing. We could go back and forth, but here's the deal. Yair Lapid is now going to be the interim prime minister. By the way, this will all officially go down early next week. There was a vote today in the Knesset. There needs to be Israeli politics. Let's just say, I'll be kind using the word, they're intricate, they're complex. I say that with love, but if you think American politics are a bit confusing, Israeli politics, I try to explain it to my wife. I've been trying to explain it to her now for about 10 years, and she still doesn't get it. And she's a very smart lady. So she said, what? Wait, explain this to me again. She said, this is the equivalent of Republicans and Democrats together in the same government. Explain to me how that works. And there's an Arab Islamist party in there. So it's very interesting how the political game operates in Israel. But here's what you need to know. Right now, they voted today in the Knesset to disband the current Israeli government. This was the first of a necessary 4 votes. And this is getting a bit in the weeds, but all you need to know, folks, at the end of the day, is that by early next week, the process should be complete of dissolving the current Israeli government. And then you go to elections in October. We're not sure when. It may be later in October, not sure the exact date yet, but let the sprint begin. And Bibi is going to be campaigning. They're all going to be campaigning to be prime minister. And Lapid, let's get to him now. He's going to be the interim prime minister, and he's going to want to hang on. He doesn't want to be just interim. He's an ambitious guy, and he's been angling to be prime minister for several years now. He would love to stay in the position beyond October. What does this mean over the next 4 months or so for Israel's security? Shouldn't we discuss that? I think with all the hubbub about the Israeli government kind of dissolving, shouldn't we be concerned about this political instability at this time in Israel's history? Shouldn't this be a time where we want to see a secure, stable Israeli government that has a clear mandate and is focused and doesn't have to worry about desperately holding a coalition together alongside people they don't even agree with? Wouldn't it be best for Israel right now to have, again, a strong coalition? And look, for 12 years, Bibi had ups and downs, and he had to his coalition disbanded. He had to cobble it back together, but he always, the political master that he is, he always came out on top. And for 12 years, you knew Bibi was the man at the top. So no matter who is at the top come October, there needs to be a sense, in my view, of stability. I want to talk more about that in a second. Before I do, quick reminder, if you're joining us today and you like what you are hearing here on the live stream, I assume if you're with us on a live stream, you may have already subscribed, but hey, if you haven't, please subscribe to the Watchman News channel. Click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We're coming to you every day, Monday through Friday, with new newscasts, new content, commentary every single day, and sometimes on the weekends, depending on the news cycle. So we would love if you joined us and became a Watchman News channel subscriber. for such a time as this. There's a lot to talk about, as you can tell. Now, if you're new to the channel, on Wednesdays, sometimes on Thursday, but usually on Wednesdays, we have our 1 hour live stream where it's a lot more free flowing, as you can tell, and conversational. We're kind of riffing, and we'll do Q&A at the end, but usually we have pretty concise 10-minute commentaries, 10 to 12 minutes every day on the newscast. So really check us out. That'd be great to have you. And hey, I got to mention, we are fast approaching 500,000 subscribers. I just shake my head even thinking about it. 500,000. Let me put this in context for you to show you what God's doing, first and foremost, and secondly, what you're doing by joining us here on the newscast and subscribing. In February 2021, we had 158,000 subscribers. Hey, that's great. That's a really nice number. Now, about 15, 16 months later, we're up to, I believe it's at 465. So we've gained about over 300,000 subscribers in less than a year and a half. Wow, God is moving. Thanks to God, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Okay, that's a subscriber pitch, and hope you join us. We have more to discuss. This moment of instability. Let's talk instability and why it could be a window for Iran, God forbid, in the next 4 months. Let's talk real quick as well. We hit Turkey earlier and the threats against Israelis in Turkey. By the way, Lapid, who as of next week will be the interim prime minister, he's visiting Turkey tomorrow, folks, on Thursday, June 23rd. And there are some rumblings that he may meet with none other than Recep Erdogan. That should be interesting. Another meeting to keep an eye on. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is visiting Iran this week. Another meeting to keep a very close eye on. But okay, this window of instability, look, when a government collapses and a coalition disbands and new elections are called, the fifth such elections in a 3-year span, I'd call that political chaos, maybe even political upheaval. And in a nation like Israel, which is the indispensable, pivotal nation prophetically and in God's timetable and in God's calculus, that's a huge deal. And as Israel has threats gathering at the door, again, you love to see, I keep coming back to the word, there's no other word to use, stability in that country. We don't have it right now. And Iran has been commenting on this. Yesterday, we had the leader of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps basically saying, look, Israel's a house of cards. The Bible says, he didn't say this, but I'm saying this. The Bible says a house divided against itself cannot stand. Certainly, I'm experiencing that right now, living here in the United States, where people are at each other's throat and the hard left is on the march. And we have a very precarious situation here as well. But in Israel, where, look, the threats, external threats are so imminent right now. And the ring of fire is surrounding Israel. What do I mean by that? I mean Iran's proxies armed to the teeth with tens of thousands of rockets and missiles and attack drones on every inch of Israel's borders. And with Iran close to the bomb, and with Israel very likely having to act sooner rather than later to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, this does not seem like the right time to have just an interim caretaker prime minister, especially not one who is left-leaning. And Yair Lapid is that, certainly on cultural issues, but some have said that he is more hawkish on defense issues. And many times in Israel, you will see that. There are people I profoundly disagree with in the political sphere in Israel. I profoundly disagree with some on cultural issues for sure, but who are still hawkish when it comes to defense and national security. Hopefully, Yair Lapid over the next 4 months will be that kind of leader, and he will be Israel's interim leader. Kind of, you would think, would lame duck be the term in a sense? Because again, it's a caretaker leadership position here, but caretaker or not, lame duck or not, Lapid is going to perhaps be forced to make some very difficult decisions over the next 4 months for Israel's security. What if over these next 4 months, Hamas launches a war against Israel? We see that, it seems, at least once a year, right? Or every few years. What if Hamas starts launching rockets, testing this interim prime minister? What if Hezbollah? What if there's an incursion in the north? What if things really heat up in Syria and missiles or drones are launched from Syria? We've seen it before. What does Lapid do? Caretaker or not, he's going to have to step up and make some very hard, strong decisions to secure Israel. And perhaps the ultimate nightmare, what if intelligence emerges that Iran is ready? They're going to break out and they're going to test a nuclear weapon or something in this regard. What does Lapid do? Although he's only got a 4-month window here, perhaps, where he's in power until elections most likely supplant him and we have a new leader, man, those could be a very momentous 4 months, right? And you have to think that Israel's enemies may probe and test Lapid over the next few months. So, folks, keep this situation in your prayers. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for wisdom for Israel's leaders. Pray for security for Israel and wisdom and guidance and boldness for their leaders. Even a guy like Lapid, you may not agree with him on a lot of issues, but he's the guy at the helm. He's about to be the guy at the helm. And no matter who the leader is in Israel, we need to pray for peace in that nation, pray for God to cover Israel with his protective hand. And again, for wisdom and guidance and discernment for Israel's leaders, it's really going to be needed, I believe, now more than ever over these next 4 months. I hope that it passes without incident, that it's smooth sailing. October is here before you know it. We have new elections, and this dangerous little period is over. But this is a very, again, I just said it, I'll use the word again, not too original, but dangerous period for Israel. The political instability, an interim leader with everything going on with Iran and with the other thing that concerns me, and I'm sure this is being discussed in our chat, with Lapid being a left-leaning guy, will it be easier for the Biden administration to pressure him? Not even pressure him. Perhaps he will be more amenable to what Biden wants to do, which is, folks, don't get it twisted. Biden would love to redivide Jerusalem. He may not be able to officially do such a thing, but there is talk of him opening a Palestinian embassy or consulate in Jerusalem, which is effectively saying to Israel, hey, you're not the sole, this is not solely your capital city. We want this to be the future capital of a Palestinian state, the eastern half of Jerusalem. Although Israel, look, the Trump administration, in an incredible moment in 2018, I was there in May 2018 for the grand opening of the U.S. Embassy. President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized recognized Jerusalem as Israel's sovereign capital. Incredible, history making. All that said, you got to think that the Biden administration, which has made it their life's mission to reverse everything President Trump did, you got to think they don't care very much about what he did in May 2018, and they don't care for it. And they would like to, believe me, if they could divide Jerusalem, they would do it tomorrow and give half to Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. And then you have Hamas lurking. If there were elections today, folks, in the Palestinian territories, Hamas would win. They won in Gaza in 2006. And then they violently seized power a year later and kicked the Palestinian Authority out of the Gaza Strip. If there were free and fair elections in the Palestinian territories, the so-called West Bank, we call it here Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland, Hamas would win. And Abbas was supposed to step down years ago or step aside and hold elections, and he never did because Hamas would win. So that's the situation we're in right now, very precarious for Israel during this time. I'm concerned Biden is visiting Israel in July. I'm concerned he will try to turn up the heat on Lapid, that he'll see an opening, that Lapid, interim, lame duck, caretaker, no matter what you want to say, that he will be more pliable, should we say, and more, again, amenable to the left-wing agenda of the Biden administration. Biden might say, Bennett, who was a right-wing guy, although Bennett was hampered by his coalition, which included leftists, Bennett, we probably couldn't sway, but Lapid, he's someone we can do business with. They might be saying that right now. So stay tuned, folks. This is a massive deal in my estimation. Hey, I hope I'm here on the live stream with you in October and saying, whew, we dodged a bullet. Lapid, he's, nothing really happened. 4 months with him, and that was that. And now Israel has a new leader. And judging by our chat, certainly people would like that new leader to be the once and future leader, Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. We shall see. Again, I believe Bibi has the inside track, but expect the unexpected. We have 3 minutes to talk about an issue that I want to hit on. I'm just pulling up an article right now. I want to quote from directly for you about this: threats against former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's a great guy, who's a great American, who I've interviewed and spent time with last summer in DC for a series of specials that we did for TBN. And pardon me, folks, I'm looking down at my phone, just pulling up an article I want to quote from directly for you, because I think you'll find this interesting. Okay. Iran again threatens to assassinate Pompeo. Wow, the title says it all. Now, real quick, we have 2 minutes to talk about this. Then we're going to do our quick watch and pray segment. Very quick. Joel 3:2. Get out your Bibles, your phones, your Bible apps, and pull up Joel 3:2 if you'd like. And we're going to break that down real quick. What does it mean, and why is it so important prophetically? And then in about 7 minutes, Q&A. Send the questions. I got them. I'm ready. So we're going to move fast here, okay? We keep it moving. Okay, here you go. Iran is threatening a possible assassination attempt on former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, with high-profile Iranian Twitter accounts posting inflammatory messages against him. Qasem Soleimani's daughter, remember him? We call him here in the newscast the not-so-dearly departed terror master. Pompeo obviously was Secretary of State when President Trump ordered the assassination of Soleimani in January 2020. And they're still seeking revenge for Soleimani's death, folks. His daughter, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, apparently, tweeted, Pompeo whines about Iran. And she has a picture of him in a cage. And she wrote, live in fear, liar, a threat against him, a clear threat. And an official Iranian government account then retweeted her tweet. She's saying you need to live in fear. And what does that mean? It follows the persistent reports we've had of Pompeo, another former Trump administration official, Brian Hook, who worked under Pompeo at the State Department, persistent threats against their lives. There's no other way to say it. John Bolton, the former national security advisor, not a huge fan of his, but Bolton also was threatened by Iran. So the bottom line is you've got the Iranian regime openly threatening U.S. officials. And there may have been, according to various reports from the U.S. government, Iranian hit teams on American soil. They're still seeking revenge for the death of Soleimani, folks. Don't forget this. It seems like, well, it was 2.5 years ago. No, they have not moved on. And they're still seeking revenge for the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the father of their nuclear weapons program. That was an Israeli operation. They have not moved on. And it's only been a combination of great intelligence work and law enforcement work that has prevented attacks, revenge attacks, from being successful against Americans and Israelis. Look, there is no shortage of motivation on the part of the Iranian regime to avenge Soleimani and Fakhrizadeh. So remember that. Pompeo is a great American. I know his security is very tight, Secret Service, etc. But shouldn't the Biden administration drop any thought of a nuclear agreement with Iran at this point? They're actively seeking to murder Americans on American soil. Shouldn't that kind of be the ultimate red line for saying, hey, enough's enough. We're walking away. We're done. We're shutting it down. We're not talking to you. Apparently not. The Biden administration seems to be kind of looking past this and saying, yeah, but we'd still like to work it out somehow with you. We know you want to kill Americans on American soil, but can we talk? If we give you what you want and appease you, will you then just leave us alone and be nice to us? That's the tenor of the message coming out of Washington, D.C. It's sad to see, but that's where we're at. We'll see where it goes. It looks like the Iranian nuclear deal is on life support right now, despite the best efforts of the Biden administration. But anything could turn around and could turn around very quickly. So keep an eye. We certainly will be here on the Watchman Newscast and bring you updates every day. Joel 3:2, as we transition here and close out in the stretch run of the news of the live stream. We've got thousands of people with us around the world, just giving you all a shout out from, I always like to say, pretty much every continent. And I joke around and say, even in Antarctica, we have a few penguins who are tuning in. Someone actually commented when I said that and said, hey, I'm actually watching you from Antarctica. I don't know where he is. He's stationed at some kind of base down there, scientific, whatever. But he's there with some penguins eating popcorn and watching, apparently. So now we can proudly say every continent we have people watching the live stream. That's pretty cool. Only, as bad as technology can be and used for nefarious purposes, it's pretty cool that we can use it for God's purposes and for kingdom business. Joel 3:2, speaking of which, it shocks me that this is overlooked. And I'm pulling it up right now. Bear with me, bear with me, bear with me. Okay. I bring this up in every speech that I give. I speak in large gatherings, churches around the country. I always bring this up. And people say, wow, I didn't hear that. How did you not hear that? Joel 3:2. God says through the prophet Joel, in that time, when I bring back again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I bring the Jewish people back, I will also gather all nations, and I will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided my land. And there God will judge them. God is saying here that he will bring all nations, literally all nations, down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, is that literally the valley of Jehoshaphat in Jerusalem? I believe it is. I've been there. It's a valley within a valley, the Kidron Valley, right outside the old city walls. The valley of Jehoshaphat is within the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem. We featured it here on the newscast previously. God says he's going to bring all nations down to the valley of Jehoshaphat and judge them for how they have treated Israel. Because they have scattered my people, God says, among the nations and divided up my land. Are you listening? Western leaders divided up my land. God doesn't like that. What do you think of that? To me, it's pretty clear. It's yet to come. This is a day yet to come. Bottom line, if God's literally going to judge nations on how they've treated Israel, I would say that Israel is kind of a big deal in God's prophetic time clock and in his calculus and in the world. God will literally judge nations. It's not me saying it. I'm quoting directly from Joel 3:2. God says he will literally judge nations in a future day to come in Jerusalem for how they've treated Israel. That's how near and dear the land and people of Israel are to God's heart. We're getting into questions now, but let me say this. All these replacement theology people out there who say God is done with Israel, the church has replaced Israel, you're wrong. And I don't know how you come to that conclusion. As a Christian, I believe in the Old and New Testament. Any honest reading of, say, Romans 11, for instance, and the Apostle Paul, his writings, or Isaiah, Joel, everything I just broke down, Jeremiah, Psalms, any honest reading of the Word of God shows that God is not done with Israel. There are many prophetic events still to come. And Joel 3:2, I would use the word passion, God's passion for that land. That's what's laid out right there. No, Israel has not been replaced. God has a great plan for the nation of Israel. He also has a great plan for the body of Christ and for followers of Jesus. Okay? God can do many things. He can have a great plan for Israel and the Jewish people still, and he can also have an awesome plan for the body of Christ and for followers of Jesus. He's a very big God, and trust me, he can multitask. Clearly in Joel 3:2, he's saying he's going to do exactly that. He loves his bride, the church. But God's also got a big heart for the land of Israel. And I think, again, Joel 3:2 breaks that down. Does that make sense? God, again, don't constrain God. Don't limit what the Lord can do, and don't limit his awesome plan. He's full of surprises, but sometimes he's very black and white, no gray areas. I will judge nations for how they've treated Israel and for dividing my land, for mistreating my people, and for scattering them throughout the nations. There's no gray areas there, and that's an event yet to come. Let's get to questions. I hope you enjoyed that. Watch and pray. You can pray about this. We're watching and we're praying. You can pray about Joel, pray for wisdom, discernment on how to pray for Israel in this time of great need. Let's get to the questions. Okay, now it gets really serious. Let's see. We do it here. We're serious, but with hopefully a smile on our face because we love our watchmen and women on the wall. Okay. William Martin asks, how many political parties exist in Israel? Many. William, good question. I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but yes, there are many political parties in Israel right now. Crisco Duck, I love that name, and if I'm not mistaken, Crisco Duck, one of our watchers here, is also a Philly native like myself, and he asks, yo, Crisco, what's going on, man? That's what we'd say in Philly. He asks, I've heard mixed reports that there is heavy fighting in Damascus. What is the latest in Damascus? Well, it's more stable than it has been. The Assad regime has basically, with the help of Iran and Hezbollah and Russia, imposed its will on most of Syria at this point. There is still certainly sporadic fighting in Damascus, no doubt. But the main thing I think we need to know about when it comes to Damascus, and I didn't mention it yet, when we talked about those Russia-Israel tensions. Hey, Israeli airstrikes, Israel never claimed responsibility, but it was Israel, took out the runway at Damascus International Airport because it had been used as a transit point by Iran to ship weapons to Hezbollah through that airport. Israel took that airport out, or at least the runway, to shut it down. It was not even 2 weeks. It was about 12 days, I believe, it was shut down because we're hearing today reports that Damascus International Airport is set to reopen tomorrow, Thursday, June 23rd. Does that mean that Iranian weapons shipments will commence, will start up once again? Again, they ship the weapons, advanced weapons parts that can later be assembled by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They ship them from Iran through that Damascus airport and sometimes on civilian flights. As a matter of fact, we talked about this on a recent newscast. The son-in-law of Qasem Soleimani, we mentioned his daughter a minute ago, now also the son-in-law, seems to be a family theme here. He's apparently involved in helping transit these weapon shipments from Iran into the hands of Lebanon, into the hands of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. But the key hub has been Damascus. Why do you think Iran wanted so badly to hang on to Syria and not let Assad fall? It's indispensable to Iran's strategy, Syria is, of supplying weapons to Hezbollah and setting up a new front against Israel from Syria. So that is the big takeaway. Damascus International Airport reopens tomorrow, and we will be watching very closely if it is indeed a transit point once again, or did Syria and Iran get the memo and they say, okay, Israel means business. We got to find another way to get weapons into the hands of Hezbollah. And if they do that, guess what? Israel, I'm pretty confident, will figure that out too and take necessary measures to prevent that as well, no matter where the weapons are being shipped through. Let's see. Okay. More questions. Good questions so far. Good questions. A good question by Sam the Man. Okay, he's got two questions here I think you will like, folks. First, two-part question by Sam the Man. Number one, what are the chances that Bibi can form a government by next week? He has 55 seats and he needs 61 seats to make a government. Could he convince Defense Minister Benny Gantz to join him? I'll take this question first, Sam. Good question. Various Israeli political analysts, and they've been wrong before, as a political analyst here in the United States, they have as well. They're saying, yeah, it's pretty slim. Bibi probably won't be able to form the government by next week. Stranger things have happened. We just saw this coalition collapse on Monday. Stranger things have happened. Maybe there's some Israeli political figure out there who has been against Bibi and who has vowed, I'll never sit in a government with Netanyahu ever again, who says, you know what? The prospect of another election, a fifth election in October in 3 years, and what if that election is inconclusive like the last few were? Let's just, you know what? I'm going to swallow my pride and sit in a government with Netanyahu for the good of the country so we can avoid another election. That, Sam, would be, it seems, the way that Bibi could have the coalition. Right now, Benny Gantz, Avigdor Lieberman, Gideon Sar, all of Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid, all of these guys are saying, I'll never sit in a government with Netanyahu, where they've said that at various times. Does one of them change their mind? Does two of them change their mind? Maybe one defects and someone who maybe is not a member of the Likud party, Netanyahu's party, defects to the Likud party. Anything could happen. Right now, it looks unlikely, but it's not impossible. But if it doesn't happen, we'll see the election in October. Can Bibi form that coalition? As Sam the Man points out, our viewer, he needs 61 seats to make a government. And he has consistently gotten like 60, 59. He's right there, but he hasn't been able to get over the hump at all. A few times he has, a few times he hasn't. That's why they keep holding new elections. He's trying desperately to form a new government. Can he get over the hump in October and form a rock-solid coalition of 61 seats and more? We shall see. Another good question by Sam the Man. Why does Lapid take over? Why is he the interim prime minister all of a sudden? He says, I thought Bennett is the prime minister. Why can't he be prime minister until the election? It seems, Sam, that this was Bennett keeping his word. Basically, he and Lapid had an agreement. When they formed this coalition last year, they said, okay, Bennett will be prime minister for the first 18 months, and then Lapid will take over as prime minister for the next 18 months. They were looking at, it was their hope to be, to have the government there for 3 years. Bennett for the first half prime minister, Lapid for the second half. This is the agreement they came to form a coalition. I guess Bennett now is saying he and Lapid are apparently personal friends, even though they have different ideologies. And it looks like Bennett is saying, okay, you know, I promise you this. I owe you one. You can at least be prime minister for the next few months. I think also Bennett has been damaged politically because some of these defections that we talked about are coming from his Yamina party. He's got members of his own party abandoning him. So I guess he's in a weakened position overall, and kind of add up those factors. And he said to Lapid, hey, take a shot at it over the next few months. We shall see how he does. I'm concerned, but I've said before, and I'll say it now, no matter where you fall or where Israeli leaders fall on the political spectrum, and I disagree profoundly on cultural issues for sure with some Israeli political figures, they seem to be, which is a good thing, on the same page when it comes to defense and national security. Meaning if an existential threat forms, you would think that Lapid would act against it. So I take some comfort in knowing that, okay, I don't agree with these guys, some in Israel on certain issues, no doubt, but on defense and security, they seem to all be reading from the same playbook and have the same view of never again, and we will not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. That's a good thing. Let's hope that I'm correct there, and Lapid sticks to those guns as well. Okay. Diane Scott asks a good question. Why are these coalition members opposed to Bibi Netanyahu? Why don't these guys like him? I named Gideon Sar, Yair Lapid, Avigdor Lieberman, Benny Gantz, Naftali Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, she's another one. All of them at one time or the other over the past few years actually served in the government with Bibi Netanyahu. I think of Moshe Alon, Bogi Alon, another guy that Bibi fell out with. And now all of them are adamantly opposed to Bibi. They don't like him. They say they'll never serve with him again. Why don't they like him? Politics, Diane. I know it's a simplistic answer, but Bibi is a shrewd political player. I'm not a political animal personally, but it takes a unique kind of person to play that game. He's the political chess master in Israel, no doubt. And he's had personality conflicts with several figures in the government. They feel like he has thrown them under the bus. He feels like they have thrown him under the bus, so to speak, and that you didn't keep your word. No, you didn't keep your word. Politics can be a dirty, dirty game, and it could lead to fallings out, no doubt. And there's a lot of pressure. I would say the president of the United States, of course, but I would say the prime minister of Israel may very well be the most difficult job in the world, not only because of the obvious security and defense threats at your borders, the challenges within your borders, but the relentless, and I mean relentless, international pressure, especially when you have a hostile U.S. leadership, which is rare, but we've had it under Obama and Biden. This could get ugly as well, for sure, as the months and years go on. So tough job, stressful job, and it leads to some stressful moments and some fallings out and bruised egos. And there you have it. Some real political rivalries here and personal rivalries. It's personal between Bibi and these individuals, which is a shame because, man, you would hope that they could put some personal rivalries together for the good of the country and form a government and be stable, as we were saying throughout the live stream today, at this time of great turmoil for Israel. I mean, I should say turmoil, not within Israel. Israel is strong in many ways, stronger than at any time in its history. But exterior turmoil, certainly some interior turmoil, but exterior, Iran, etc. Man, you'd like to see some stability there on the part of Israel. Okay. Michael Geffner in Brooklyn, the BK, says, why are so many people against Netanyahu in Israel? He seems so incredibly brilliant and will do anything to protect Israel. I love and respect him immensely, says Michael. Michael, I'm a Bibi fan as well. And, you know, Israel's a tough place. When you're prime minister for 12 years, that's a long time. People get tired of you. We need a new face, that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of factors to it. But for an American audience, certainly, Bibi, you know, went to school not far from where I grew up. Did you know, a little trivia for you, Bibi went to high school at Cheltenham High School outside of Philadelphia. I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia. He went to school just outside of Philly, and he went to Cheltenham. And another little trivia fact for you, Baseball Hall of Famer Reggie Jackson also went to Cheltenham High School. Pretty interesting. Just a little nugget for you. So Bibi has spent time here. His dad was a professor at MIT. Bibi was a soccer player, by the way, at Cheltenham High School. So no one can speak to an American English-speaking audience like Bibi, for sure. That's one thing that really has been in his favor as well. But yeah, I mean, it's polarized in Israel, just like it is here in the U.S. and around the world, it seems these days politically. I talk to people in Israel, I'm there, who love Bibi. There was, during the election in May 2021, rock Bibi, only Bibi. Many were saying, only Bibi. He's the only leader for us. Then others were saying, anyone but Bibi. So, very interesting moment in Israel, in Israeli politics, in the world, and you need to keep it in your prayers. Do me a favor, do yourself a favor. Let's follow that biblical mandate to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for wisdom and discernment for the people of Israel and for the leaders of Israel for such a time as this, because they surely need it. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here in the live stream. Remember, if you want to become a premium member, go to the homepage under Join. For $4.99 a month, you can join us as a premium member. A lot of good perks there. You'll be learning more about that in the weeks to come. We've got some premium member Q&A that we're going to be announcing. Just me and you, our premium members, for a longer Q&A. All of your questions will get answered. If you're not a premium member, don't worry. We still love you. But this is a good feature to check out on the homepage under Join. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.